Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Foreign Correspondence Club. My name is Christoph Neidhardt, and first some housekeeping. Please put your mobile phone on silent mode. And since we still have some kind of COVID, you are encouraged or required or to keep your mask on when you don't eat or drink. At least that's a suggestion. And since we haven't really recovered from COVID, as can be seen by the size of our audience, maybe we should have the mask on. A very warm welcome to our speaker tonight, Dr. Hong Yunshin, or Yunshin Hong, with her book Comfort Stations as Remembered by Okinawans During World War II. To her right, this is Professor Robert Ricketts. He translated the book. He was a professor at Wako University in Machida, but is retired now. He translated her book into English. She wrote it originally in Japanese, although being Korean. Although she speaks quite decent English, he will act as an interpreter tonight. The original book, by the way, won the Best Publication Award by Okinawa Times in 2017, and today is the day of the publication of the third edition in Japanese. Dr. Hong has her PhD from Waseda, and she's still affiliated with that university. She also is a visiting fellow at the Tokyo Center for Asian Pacific Partnership of the Asian Research Institute, and she lectures at several other Tokyo universities. I don't know how much, with so much teaching, how you managed to write such an impressive book. Despite its title, this book is not a book about comfort women, or the Yanfu, and certainly not a book about sexual violence, abuse, and rape these women suffered. They were mostly young Koreans, but also from other countries, including Okinawa. Dr. Hong, of course, covers that aspect too, but other books have focused on it, and she doesn't do that. Her book is about much more than that. This is also no book about the comfort stations or the Japanese military brothels, the Ianjo, as the title would imply. Dr. Hong describes in great detail how, among others, private homes have been requisitioned by the military to establish comfort stations. But this book is about more than that too. It's a book about Okinawa. I have learned so much about Okinawan history in that book. Did you know, by the way, that there is or was a tradition of bullfights in Okinawa? One comfort station was built in a bull ring or arena for bullfights. Or did you know that Okinawans, other than Yamato Japanese, used to live under one roof with their domestic animals, goats and pigs, like some Europeans, my fellow Swiss, certain of my fellow Swiss, for example, but totally different from the Japanese on the mainland. They didn't have domestic animals. One comfort station was housed in a medical clinic, some next to elementary schools. If we consider the alleged purpose of the comfort women system, that is, to keep this ugly and criminal side of the military away from the population, then to have the stations in plain sight sounds very strange. Think of these traditional tightly knit communities, and the military moves in, it recruits corps workers to build garrisons, airstrips, and soon it establishes its own brothels. That alone qualifies as structural violence or colonial violence. You quote, Yunshin, you quote one mayor of a town in Okinawa who opposed the establishment of comfort stations by saying, "This is not Manchuria." But Tokyo treated Okinawa often almost like Manchuria. To me, this is a book about war, and a book about what war does to people, especially civilians. how it affects and destroys a society, and how the traumatic events are remembered. So this book is an ethnography of Okinawa before, during, and after World War II, meticulously researched and very well written. A travelogue, a battlefield reportage, it is too, based on an extremely big wealth and scope of research. A study of the other sides of war and the traumatic memory of it. What's so special about Okinawa? It was the only place within Japan, or Japan proper, where the army built comfort stations. The islands were also the only part of Japan where a land war was fought until defeat. Although considered as a part of Japan, more or less, Japan's military didn't defend Okinawa or the Okinawans. It fought the war on Okinawa to slow down the Americans' progress. Tokyo sacrificed Okinawans to buy time to spare Japan's main island a ground war. Ryukyu and Korea have more in common than we think. Until the islands were annexed by Japan, Ryukyu was an independent kingdom, or semi-independent. Japan annexed Okinawa and Korea in the same period, the Meiji period, Korea only a few decades later. Okinawa was nominally made a part of the Inner Empire. Korea, where the majority of the so-called comfort women were abducted from, remained a colony. But both were victims. During the war, Okinawans were forced to collaborate with the Japanese military, so they were made to be victims and victimizers at the same time. For Dr. Hong, this last point was a very special one, as she wrote in her introduction. When researching aggression, one tends to side with the victims, naturally. Dr. Hong, as a Korean woman researching Japanese system of enslaving Korean women for its army brothels anyway. On Okinawa, however, this felt different. That duality or antagonism disappeared. The floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you.
안녕하세요. 今日は緊張する気持ちで参りましたが、司会者があまりにもうまく説明してくださって緊張がちょっと和らがりました。で、実は今日緊張した理由はやはり今現在ウクライナの戦場が続いている状況であり、また今日私はまさに1945年の地上戦沖縄戦の記憶について語ろうとしているからです。で、さらに今なお沖縄には 69% の基地が集中していることから、この問題は現在深刻ですね。で、そういうことで、今日は非常に緊張する気持ちで参りました。
Good evening. I'm very much feeling the pressure of the moment, but Christopher's wonderful introduction covered most of the important parts, and I feel a little bit more at ease. Thank you.
Thank you.
With the savage land war raging in Ukraine, I'm about to speak on how Okinawans remember the 1945 Battle of Okinawa and the military sexual violence that accompanied it. Okinawan memories of World War II remain robust today, despite the intervening 27 years of direct U.S. military rule and the occupation of Okinawan land by U.S. military bases. Despite Okinawa's return to Japan in 1972, nearly 70% of all U.S. bases in Japan are now concentrated in Okinawa Prefecture. Ongoing militarization has also been accompanied by a high incidence of military violence against local women. Okinawans remember the wartime Japanese comfort stations and see the sexual abuse of today's U.S. bases as a continuation of that violence, albeit in a different form. Military sexual violence, then, is nothing new in Okinawa.
敗戦から77年が経ちまして、今年は特に沖縄は日本復帰から50周年になります。しかし長い間、やはり沖縄人が国際社会に向かって自らの戦場体験、ことに朝鮮人との関係性について語る、そういう機会はあまりにも少なかったというふうに思います。 でこの状況の中で本日ブックプレゼンテーションを企画してくださった日本外国人読破園協会の皆さんに深く感謝申し上げます。
It's been 77 years since Japan's defeat in 1945, and this year marks the 50th anniversary of Okinawa's reversion to Japan in 1972. But Okinawans rarely have the occasion to share with an international audience their recollections of the battlefield and the Korean and other comfort women they witnessed during the war. For that reason, I am very grateful to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan for the chance to speak about this subject through my book, which hopes to give these voices a chance to be heard both in Japan and abroad.
実はこの場にはまた本書英語版を世に出してくださった出版社プリルと、それから日本語版のインパクト出版会の、それと翻訳と出版に関わったセンター for Intercultural Communication とリンガーギルドの皆さんいらっしゃいました。本当に感謝申し上げたいと思います。実は今日は私の大学の恩師もいらっしゃる予定で、博士論文の第2の審査になるんじゃないか、もっと緊張しましたが、幸いコロナの状況であってですね、今日いらっしゃれないということで、ちょっと楽な気持ちでできるようになりました。で最後に2年半かけてこの本当に分厚い本を訳してくださったロバート・リケットさん、今日は通訳者としてまた重荷を感じておられると思いますが、どうか一緒に登壇することを心から喜んでいます。で、リケットさん、どうもありがとうございました。
どういたしまして。This book break is being attended in person or via Zoom by my publishers, my personal and academic mentors, and those who contributed to the translation, editing, and printing of the volume. I give a special shout out to the editors of our Dutch publisher, Brill, the Japanese publisher Impacto Shuppankai, Lingua Guild, and the Center for Intercultural Communication. The original version of this book began as a PhD dissertation for Waseda University. If I seem overly nervous tonight, it's because my former advisors may be here. They may be watching us on Zoom, but they plan to intend to come. I would mention specifically Professors Nakahara Michiko and Dr. Kurt Radke, who is joining us from the Netherlands, I hope. I feel like I'm facing my dissertation committee for a second and more difficult thesis defense. Finally, I wish to thank the translator and editor Robert Ricketts, who spent 2.5 years producing the voluminous English text and will be translating for me tonight.
では一つの証言から始めさせていただきたいと思います。証言は日本語は読みませんので、もし何か知りたい方は日本語バージョンをお願いします。はい、リケットさんお願いします。
今ですか？はい。ごめんなさい。次のところ、自分の分。
そうです。
すみません。
I forgot.
I was rehearsing my part. Okay. I just want to say two or three things very, very simply, and then let that suffice for an introduction. The difficulty of translating is trying to imagine what's not written on the page. Every time I go back to the original text of Yunshin's book, I learn new things, and I also find new translation errors. A big part of what is not on the page involves the theme of this book. As Tomiyama Ichiro puts it in his recent review of the book, Hong Yunshin's task is to create an imagination for wounds that cannot even become words. So the odds are stacked against the translator from the start. It was a very difficult book, but a very immensely rewarding book, and continues to be so.
失礼しました。ではまた証言から始めさせていただきたいと思います。リケットさん、one more time, please. That's okay.
There is something bereaved families absolutely cannot accept. My husband was killed by a Japanese soldier on July 3rd, 1945, after the Battle of Okinawa had ended. But the Japanese state has never made any effort to provide us with survivors' benefits. In 1971, I filed a petition with the government explaining in detail the circumstances of my husband's death, but no official ever tried to understand or address my claim. So I have decided to reproduce my petition in the official prefectural record of the Okinawan War in order to hold the state accountable in perpetuity.
この証言者はスパイとされた夫の死を忘れずに、それを永久に沖縄県史に留めようとしています。で、この証言者のように沖縄は復帰前後からさまざまな証言が行われ、市町村市が住民の立場に立った証言調査を始めています。本書で注目しているのはこのような証言です。で、本書は慰安婦本人というよりも沖縄戦場で慰安婦を見た人々、つまり他者であった沖縄人の記憶によって構成された慰安婦問題です。つまり慰安婦ではなく慰安婦を見た人々、また慰安婦ではなく慰安所という軍事施設がどのように日常生活を歩む沖縄人の社会的、精神的な影響を与えたのかという問いから出発しているものです。
This book focuses on survivor narratives such as that of China Uto, who I just cited. I am concerned with how Okinawans perceive the war and the comfort women they encountered in their daily lives. In other words, I attempt to reconstruct the comfort women issue through the post-war memories of Okinawan war survivors who observed them. At the same time, I am not concerned as much with the comfort women per se as with the comfort stations. In Okinawa, the comfort stations were a special form of military organization with very destructive social and psychological impacts. It is the influence of the present of these sex venues on local communities and the Okinawan life world that interests me.
これが本書で紹介している慰安所マップです。その数は2022年現在146カ所に上ります。
This is a map showing the location of comfort stations in wartime Okinawa. As of this year, researchers have pinpointed the sites of 146 military sex facilities.
慰安所の始まりは沖縄本島から船で16時間もかかる大東諸島です。1941年日本の海軍基地で簡易飛行場なんですけれどもが設置された時に初めて慰安所が建てられました。その後43年に拡張されて44年新しい慰安所が大東諸島にできています。しかしこの大東諸島での慰安所は沖縄の住民にそれほど知らせられませんでした。なぜならばこの島は資源開発のための特別なプランテーションであり、でここに居住するのは一般住民ではなく企業によって採用された労働者、主に八丈島出身の人々だったからです。ところが44年12月になるとこの島にラサトから約7名の慰安婦が送られてきます。でその7人の慰安婦が送られてきます。その名簿が残されています。
The first military comfort station was built in the Daito Islands, which defined Okinawa's easternmost boundary. By ship, it takes 16 hours to reach this tiny island group. In 1941, the Imperial Navy completed a rudimentary airfield on South Daito Island and set up Okinawa's first comfort station there. In 1943, the airfield was expanded, and in the summer of 1944, the Imperial Army deployed to the Daitos and added new comfort stations. Okinawans elsewhere were not aware of these venues. The Daitos were a plantation society populated by migrants from Hachioji and other islands, and very few local testimonies have been recorded. In December 1944, 7 Korean women were sent to Raza Island, the southernmost of the Daitos, to work in a comfort station.
沖縄全土に拡散された慰安所は主に1944年春から45年までに設置されていきますけれども、10万人近い軍隊がその満州で中国北部からですね上陸してくる時期です。
Okay, good. This is slide number 4. From the early spring of 1944, some 100,000 Japanese troops disembarked on Okinawa. These forces created the vast majority of comfort stations between the spring of 1944 and early 1945. As the Army militarized Okinawa's major islands, local residents became keenly aware of the sex facilities. In the late summer of 1944, tactical divisions from Manchuria and northern China began to arrive in Okinawa, bringing with them their own comfort women. Many Koreans arrived at this time.
なので朝鮮ピーと呼ばれるようになります。朝鮮ピーとは中国の隠語で女性の性器を指す言葉ですね。朝鮮人慰安婦は朝鮮ピーと呼ばれるようになります。
Troops arriving from China referred to the comfort women as Chosen P, P being a pejorative Chinese term for the female genitalia.
このように沖縄に到着した部隊が中国の戦線から高度なシステム化された慰安所を持って、またかつアジアに対するその別紙を持ったまま上陸している。これが沖縄における慰安所の第一の特徴になります。
The new units had a highly developed system of comfort stations and carried with them the discriminatory attitudes toward Asians, and particularly Asian women. This highly systematized organization is the first characteristic of Okinawan comfort stations.
日本軍は沖縄に約15カ所の飛行場を設置しました。でそしてその飛行場の周辺の村々にこの慰安所が設置されていきます。住民は飛行場の建設のための労働力でもあったということになります。
The Japanese Army and Navy built a total of 15 military airfields on the major Okinawan islands. Most airfields were grouped in clusters around the most comfort stations were grouped in clusters around the airfield sites, which were located near local villages. As Okinawan civilians were mobilized for labor, the military began a crash program to set up comfort stations for Japanese troops assisting the construction.
Next slide, please. それで居住飛行場大体のその進駐日誌で明らかになっているように、その労働力である住民がその交換事件が多発すると、その反軍感情を抱かせるのをすごい警戒するようになります。それが明確のその慰安所を立てた名目の一つでした。で、これが沖縄の慰安所の第二の特徴になります。
Unit activity reports give us a clear picture of how the comfort stations were constructed. This slide, number 8, shows a top-secret order for the construction of a comfort station issued by the 50th Airfield Battalion. The order states clearly that the reason for building the comfort station was to prevent local outbursts of anti-military feeling. This is the second defining feature of comfort stations in Okinawa.
慰安所は3種類ありました。まず要塞建築第6中隊という特別な建築部隊が作った慰安所のタイプ。
There were three types of comfort stations. The first type were barracks-like structures built by the 6th Fortress Construction Company and other military engineering units.
で今ご覧になっている三角兵舎のような形で作られた仮慰安所のもの。
The second type were temporary triangular A-frame barracks for military units that were just arriving.
最後に民家を接種して慰安所にしたパターンです。民家を慰安所に、これが沖縄における慰安所の第三の特徴です。
The third type of comfort station was set up in Okinawan homes that the Army had requisitioned. Note that a majority of comfort stations in Okinawa were created from private residences. This is the third characteristic of Okinawan comfort stations.
つまり慰安所設置には 県とか役場、それから村の有力者、住民の協力が必須であったことになります。日本軍が最初は沖縄県知事の泉周期に協力を求めました。
When the Army asked Governor Izumi Shuki to help recruit Okinawan comfort women from Tsuji, the licensed quarter of Naha, he flatly refused. And this is his reason. This is not Manchuria or the South Seas. In any event, Okinawa is imperial soil. You cannot build that kind of facility on imperial land. The prefecture is unable to cooperate with you on this issue.
それでその次は知事遊郭の女性たちにお国のためにと説得し、廃業届を出す行為を防ぐように制限します。無理やり慰安婦にさせられます。朝鮮人慰安婦の他にもこのように知事遊郭の女性たち、また台湾人、そして一部ではありますが、日本人の慰安婦も強引に慰安所の生活を強いられることになります。
The Army then asked Tsuji brothel owners to cooperate with the Army for the good of the country, but housemasters tried to shut down their businesses in order to protect the women. So the Army asked the police not to accept applications for closure. This enabled the military to acquire the women against their wishes. Okinawa's comfort stations contain Koreans, the most numerous, Okinawans, and smaller numbers of Taiwanese and Japanese. All were coercively recruited and held in bondage.
では慰安所設置は住民にどのような影響を与えたでしょうか。何よりも家を接種された住民は住まいを求めなければならなく、軍にどうか豚小屋とか馬小屋に住ませてほしいと頼んだり、あるいは親戚の家を頼りに村を離れる場合もありました。
How did the establishment of comfort stations impact the lives of Okinawans? First of all, having one's home confiscated by the military and turned into a comfort station meant that the family moved out of its home and into a stable pigsty or work shed on the property, if they were lucky. Many had to turn to relatives for help.
また沖縄の文化や歴史関係なく、その慰安所が建てられたために琉球王朝のその小慶別荘までもが慰安所となっていきます。慰安所となっていきます。伊予の浜という地域の小慶別荘はたちまち米軍の攻撃のターゲットになっていくんですね。なので慰安所で使われた建物がさえなければこの村は攻撃されなかったのではないかと今も伝わっています。
Even the summer home of the royal Sho family in Ihonohama was turned into a comfort station. The mansion was an important historical and cultural monument reserved for use by Okinawa's traditional aristocracy. Located next to the airfield, the Sho family villa became a target for U.S. Navy warships whose bombardments leveled every home in the hamlet. No troops were stationed nearby. Ihonohama residents have testified that had it not been for the mansion, the hamlet would have survived the war.
10月10日、1944年10月10日には那覇の 90% が全焼します。ところで慰安所はなくなりませんでした。先ほどスライドでご覧になったように、むしろ慰安所は2倍ほど増えているですね。
On October 10, 1944, as U.S. forces prepared to invade the Philippines, U.S. aircraft attacked Okinawa, destroying military bases, but also leveling the Okinawan capital of Naha, where 90% of all buildings were burned to the ground. But the comfort stations not only remained, in some areas they actually expanded as Japanese troops realigned their positions.
でむしろ中熟種以降は軍はこの慰安所を広報施設として設置し、そこに通う兵士たちを厳しく徹底的に管理するようになります。でそれは住民側から言えば慰安所に近くに住んでいてもその場所は公然たる秘密となっていくということを意味します。また慰安婦の立場から見ればほとんど監禁状態となり、軍に全て生きるために依存しなければならない存在となっていくことを意味します。
After the October 10 assault, the Japanese army strengthened its control over the comfort stations. It issued strict regulations and set up special management boards inside Army tactical units. Under the new rules, the military placed the comfort stations in exclusive no-go zones, banned all contacts between locals and soldiers, and outlawed drinking parties inside. Okinawans saw their villages divided internally by these no-go zones, and the comfort stations became open military secrets. At the same time, the comfort women themselves were subjected to direct military control, confined to quarters, and became entirely dependent on the army.
これは沖縄の中部西原のアジャオナハという集落の被害の状況ですけれども、約 25% の住民が一家全滅しています。で、地図の中の三角の表示はこの村で唯一の病院でしたが、と同時に慰安婦の性病管理をしていました。で、黒の点が一家全滅になった家ですね。で、浦添は18のアジャのうちに7つのアジャに合計15カ所の慰安所が建てられましたけれども、で、最も被害の多い慰安所があった村の一家全滅率はおよそ 43% に上ります。
This slide shows households obliterated by U.S. bombing near the Army East Airfield in Onaha Hamlet. The triangle is the comfort station, which is located in the village medical clinic, where comfort women underwent VD, venereal disease exams. The black dots with numbers are families that were completely annihilated. They represented 25% of the hamlet's households. In Urasoe Village, 7 out of 18 communities had a total of 15 comfort stations. In some of those hamlets, 43% of all families were wiped out.
住民は当然不満が高まりますけれども、軍は自らの戦略ミスを認めませんでした。そして多くの甚大な被害を負った村々は今度はテーマ大きい地域の治安問題にすり替えていきます。で、ここで私が言いたいのは、軍が慰安所の規律を強化していく過程と、こうした軍が守るべき住民を別の視線で、つまりテーマ大きい地域として設置していく、このプロセスが同時進行に行われているということです。
Local inhabitants were unhappy about the demands the Army was placing on them, and many filed official complaints to protest. Unit activity reports refer to these petitions as slanderous and accuse the ungrateful locals of stirring up antipathy against the Army. Where such rumors are rife, the report says, espionage is a problem. The important point here is that the tightening of control over comfort stations went hand in hand with the counterintelligence operations to ferret out subversive elements.
そして1945年4月から5月にかけて地上戦がだんだん激化していくと、その慰安所は徐々に軍の陣地がある山奥など山稜地域に移動するようになり、人目が届かないところに分散するようになります。慰安所はこの地点においては住民の村の中で、それこそ目には見えないけれども米軍が上陸することを間近に感じさせるある種の恐怖として、確かに住民の体験に深く影響を及ぼすようになったのです。
As the ground war intensified in late April and May 1945, the comfort stations were dispersed, and together with their units, they moved into mountainous and forested areas where Okinawans could not see them. Although the comfort stations were now out of sight, the existence of the sex venues was used by Army propaganda to create an obsessive fear of American sexual and other atrocities.
米軍の上陸の拠点となった読谷では、上陸の翌日4月2日にチビチリ釜での集団窒血の惨事が行われています。当時チビチリ釜では満州から帰ってきた軍の看護婦がこの中国で日本軍が犯した虐待事件を村人に伝えたことが一つの引き金となっていると言われています。 でまた釜の中には米軍上陸を目の前にしていたサイパン帰りの人やそれから中国戦線でその、在庫軍人などの話が飛び回る中そのだんだん死の恐怖がその高まっていきます。
An early example is the tragic group suicide that took place inside the large Chibichiri cavern in Yomitan village on April 2nd. A survivor relates that the trigger for the suicide was the presence of a nurse who had been with the Japanese army in Manchuria and China. She explained to the people how the soldiers had abused Chinese civilians, especially women, and stated that a similar fate awaited Okinawans should the Americans capture them. Many of the villagers had just returned from Saipan, where they had witnessed Japan's defeat. Others were veterans of the China theater. The villagers decided it was better to die together, and in fact many killed themselves. 60% of those who died were young people under 18 years old.
そしてこの看護婦の女性は沖縄戦では嘉手納のこの病院で勤めて朝鮮人やその父遊郭の女性たちの性病検査をしたと言われます。でこれはNext slide, please. でこれは読谷の慰安所のマップですが、どれだけ慰安所が住民の日常に浸透しているのかが分かります。
The nurse that told the villagers about atrocities, Japanese atrocities in China, had actually been working at a medical clinic in Kadena, administering venereal disease exams to comfort women. This is a map of comfort stations in Yomitan village, and her clinic was near Yomitan village. It illustrates how the sex venues were embedded in the community, and it was easy to start this kind of rumor.
ここで1945年春に看護要員として動員された10代の未成年者の証言を紹介したいと思います。リケットさん、please.
Okay. Here I introduce the testimony of a teenage girl who was drafted into the army as a nurse's aide in early 1945. Crossing the battlefield with her cousin, also a nurse's aide, she got lost and took shelter in an underground bunker. There the following scene ensued. You can follow up on the slide if you wish. What were you talking about? Where did you come from? The staff officer asked brusquely. When we had explained ourselves, he said, "If that's so, hold out your hands and let me see them." We hadn't been in a camp or worked in the sun for some time, and we were young, so our hands were very white. When I tendered my hand, the officer immediately gave it a hard slap and growled, "Look at this hand, and you call yourselves combat support elements? If you're not comfort women, then I say you're spies." I must have had some fight still left in me, because I thought of the 2 hand grenades I carried, one strapped on each side of my waist. My cousin also had one on her. In Okinawan, I said, "Kaniru Yamatenju," these stupid mainland Japanese. I told my cousin, "I'm going to pull the safety pin on my grenade and throw it at that dumb officer. We'll die together with your grenade."
でこのようにスパイとされた彼女は実はかつて慰安所を提供した村の有力者の娘でした。また何も偏見もなく慰安婦たちに踊りを学んだ経験も持っています。そこまで協力したのにスパイとされていく。そこで憤慨してで沖縄語で提供しながらその爆弾まで投げようとしているシーンですね。で幸いこの父親を知っている沖縄の兵士がいたために命は救われましたが非常に胸を打つ証言です。
Let me add that this woman's father had been forced to let the army use his home as a comfort station. The daughter had played with the comfort women who actually taught her traditional Okinawan dance and had nothing against them. When a Japanese officer called her a spy, she became so infuriated that speaking in Okinawan, she planned to kill the officer and then herself. Fortunately, she was recognized by a captain who knew her father, and she and her cousin were released.
そして米軍が上陸した1週間後には、ほとんど1週間後の1945年4月9日に沖縄語を使う人、会話する人はスパイとして処分するという命令が出されています。
On April 9th, just 1 week after the invasion of Yomitan, the Army headquarters command bunker beneath Shuri Castle issued a directive that forbade Okinawans to speak their native language. Violators were subject to summary execution. The Army killed many civilians for this offense. And I'll just read the directive. Henceforth, all regular and auxiliary military personnel shall speak only standard Japanese. Anyone found conversing in Okinawa will be considered a spy and punished accordingly.
沖縄語禁止の命令が出されたのは32軍の司令部の号ですけれども、この号ではその32軍号で憲兵隊の将校が32軍号にあったこの朝鮮人慰安婦の女性たちをそのスパイ視された沖縄人をこう次から次へとこう銃剣で刺し殺す命令をしています。この憲兵は首を切り落とした後にその死体の上を今度はこの沖縄のその鉄血勤労隊などの少年たちに土や石で投げるように命令します。で、こうした状況は慰安婦と日本軍が決して同志的な関係ある、ということを意味しているわけではありません。でむしろ監禁状態で孤立した慰安婦、また潜在的にスパイとされていく日本国民でありながらも日本人になりきれない沖縄人が沖縄戦場でこの恐怖の中で暴力の中にさらされてだんだん加害者になっていく、そういう状況そのものを物語っています。
Comfort women lived in the special quarters inside the Japanese 32nd Army's command bunker. During the invasion, a military police officer ordered 4 or 5 Korean women who worked there to use a bayonet and stab an Okinawan woman who had been accused of spying. The Comfort women obeyed without thinking, stabbing the woman one after the other. Then the officer cut off the victim's head with his sword, after which student members of the Iron and Blood Imperial Duty Corps and other Okinawans threw stones and dirt clods at the body. Isolated and confined to quarters, Comfort women were at the mercy of the Army, which regarded them as potential spies. Although officially Japanese nationals, they were second-class colonial subjects who could never become truly Japanese. They obeyed the execution order out of fear for their own lives.
米軍は上陸とともに約12カ所の収容所を沖縄の北部に設置していきます。で、next please。で、それで今この北部の収容地区ですけれども、この名護で収容所に入れられたら朝鮮兵にされるよというデマが一気に沖縄中に広まるようになります。で、住民の多くは守ってくれるはずの日本軍がむしろゲリラ戦でこの自分たちを殺したり強姦したりする。で、一方で敵だと思ったアメリカ兵に救われて食べ物や治療を受ける。で、既存の価値観が全て崩壊してしまうようなそういう収容地区の一角で朝鮮人慰安婦を目撃しています。
As soon as the U.S. invaders moved inland, they immediately set up prisoner of war camps for Japanese combatants and refugee relocation camps for displaced Okinawan civilians, comfort women, and Korean forced laborers. A total of 12 refugee-controlled centers were created in the northern part of Okinawa main island. Rumors spread everywhere that all women sent to the Nago refugee camp would be made to work as comfort women for the Americans. In the camps, many refugees were killed and raped by marauding Japanese guerrillas who periodically attacked refugee centers. On the other hand, enemy forces, U.S. Army, protected the refugees and provided them with food and medical care. Several camps set aside a section for surviving comfort women, and there are many eyewitness accounts of their presence in the camps.
また米軍はこの収容所の中にいる朝鮮人女性たちに戦争孤児 とか看護婦の仕事を彼女たちが朝鮮に帰還するまでの間にさせていました。今ご覧になっているこの写真の女性は当時戦争孤児だったチャハリツコさんですね。で彼女はせっかく助かったのにまた衰弱した赤ちゃんが翌朝になっていくとだんだん死んでしまった。そういう死んだ赤ちゃんを抱いて朝鮮人女性たちがどこかから木箱をもらってきてこの木箱に赤ちゃんたちを入れて葬っていったと言っていました。で今彼女は門の前に座ってるんですけれども、こうやってまだ10代の小さい戦争孤児たちは彼女のこのように座ってですね、私たちの親はもう死んだのかなと言いながら泣いたと言われています。
Meanwhile, as former comfort women awaited repatriation to the Korean peninsula, they worked in hospitals and orphanages set up in the camps. The youngest orphans, weakened by the war, seemed to die in their sleep night after night. Jaharitsuko was one of those orphans, and she had been cared for by former Korean comfort women. She recalls that such women went out of their way to bury the dead children, hunting for wooden boxes and other scrap materials to build coffins. Jaha says that the children used to sit at this wall and cry for their parents, not knowing if they were dead or alive. And the building survives today. You can see the pictures.
はい。でこれが今も残っている孤児院の様子です。で朝鮮人女性たちはこの収容所から大体1945年末には朝鮮半島に帰ったとされますけれども、しかし戦後も沖縄にそのまま置き去りにされた慰安婦たちがいました。その例を申し上げながら、なぜ今でも沖縄で慰安婦問題が記憶され続けているのかということを申し上げたいと思います。
In late 1945, the U.S. military returned Korean survivors to their homeland. Others, however, unable or unwilling to return to Korea, continued living in Okinawa. I will introduce one such individual below in order to understand why so many Okinawan war survivors have remembered the comfort women and why they still talk about them.
1992年、沖縄の女性たちは画期的な地図を発表します。でこの地図が私の研究の前に出た最初のオリジナルの慰安所マップですね。でご存知のように91年はキマクスン証言があり、韓国のキマクスさんが実名で名乗り出たことが世界中で波紋を呼びます。でその後日本本土ではこの慰安婦裁判を支援する動きでこの慰安婦と連結していくわけです。でしかし沖縄では全く違う形の動きがありました。それは慰安婦本人を呼ぶのではなく、自らの経験を語る。でそしてこの経験をこのように荒い点ではありますけれども、私たちは実際慰安所というものを見た、私たちは慰安婦を見た、知っているということを点で示し、空間化し、世に出して訴えたのです。
This is the original map of Okinawan comfort stations. It is an epical one-page guide to Okinawa's wartime sex venues. It was completed in 1992 by the Okinawan Women's History Research Group. 1 year earlier, in August 1991, South Korean Kim Hak-soon, using her real name, told a press conference in Seoul about her experiences as a military comfort woman. In Japan, a broadly based civil society movement grew up to support the court cases of former comfort women and express solidarity with their struggle.
でまたそこには一人の置き去りにされた女性がその存在がありました。1975年10月22日、沖縄タイムスで琉球新報本土では高知新聞が一人の慰安婦について報じています。で入管が本人の希望によって在留特別許可証を出したということですね。 でこの女性がペボンギさんですが、日本が復帰することによって今度は日本国の下で外国人登録をしなければ海外に強制送還される危機の中で慰安婦としての過去を悪化していきます。でこのことは当時沖縄復帰後の混乱期にいた沖縄の住民にとって自分たちの経験と重ね合ってその痛みを感じる、つまり共鳴を呼ぶようになります。
On October 22nd, 1975, the Okinawa Times, the Ryukyu Shimpo, and the mainland Kochi Daily News reported that Japan's immigration services had granted a special residence permit to an undocumented former Korean comfort woman who had surfaced in Okinawa. Her name was Pei Pongi, and she had been legally stateless since the United States relinquished control over Okinawa in 1972. Under Japan's alien registration law, Pei was in danger of being deported to South Korea. Consequently, she made her predicament known and openly talked about her past.
そしてペボンギさんがちょうどキマスンさんが名乗り出た1991年に亡くなります。でこのマップはすでに70年代からペボンギさんは知っていた、しかし何もできなかった小説から生まれたのが先ほど皆さんに見せた92年の慰安所マップです。その意味でこのマップは70年代からすでに証言し続けてきた沖縄の戦争体験記の結晶とも言えると思います。でこのマップを作った女性たちは95年米兵による少女暴行事件の際にはこの暴力が恒常的な暴力であると定義します。つまり米兵によることも恒常的な暴力であると。でそしてそれは慰安婦問題の延長線にあるということをはっきり言葉で示し今も語り続けています。私はこうした沖縄のパブリックのメモリーはですね、で日本本土で1945年8月15日に戦争が終わったとこの時間軸で考えるこの、パブリックメモリーとは根本的に違いがあると考えています。このメモリーは空間の記憶であり、一人一人の苦しみの証拠ですね。で、それは今皆さん手元にあるジャパンフォーカスの富山一郎さんの本書に対する書評で詳しく書いてあるのでご参照ください。
Pei Pongi died in October 1991. The same year, Kim Haksung came out publicly. By then, her name was well known in Okinawa, but many islanders reflected on how little they had actually done to help while she was alive. Pei's death and the Comfort Station map, which appeared the next year, were a call to action. Indeed, the 1992 map was the crystallization of memory work that had begun with Okinawa's reversion in 1972. Pei's appearance in 1975 was an additional spur to the collection and publication of survivor narratives in prefectural, city, town, and village histories of the war. Another pivotal event was the horrendous rape of a 12-year-old Okinawan girl by 3 American military personnel in 1995. The women's group that had produced the Comfort Station map denounced that crime as an example of structural violence and linked it to the structural violence of the wartime comfort stations. They viewed the sex crimes associated with U.S. bases as an extension of that violence. In other words, the Okinawan public memory is fundamentally different from that of the Japanese mainland. For ordinary Japanese, the war ended and peace was restored on August 15, 1945. For Okinawans, military violence has never ended, and peace continues to elude them. This point has been stated cogently by Professor Tomiyama Ichiro in his recent review of Yunshin's book.
ところが皆さん、このペポンギさんの含む記憶、70年代から続く沖縄の記憶、また90年代この慰安所マップを作ったような沖縄の動きは日本の一般社会に全く注目されてこなかった。で、これは日本社会としてこれらの声が沖縄の問題として特殊化され、どこかイレギュラーな この主張として沈黙され、また排除されてきたことが原因ではないでしょうか。言い換えれば他者かとも言えると思います。私の研究はこうした埋もれてきて価値を評価されなかった沖縄の戦場の体験の証言が持つ希望を追ったものです。で、1992年の慰安所マップを先行研究にしつつ、約14年間のフィールドワークで聞き取りをして、この朝鮮人と住民の関係性を探ることによって目に見えるように浮上させたのが本書です。
Unfortunately, the general public in mainland Japan ignored the introspection and fact-finding activities of Okinawans after the 1970s and the mainland redress movement of the 1990s. To the average person in Tokyo, for instance, these were exceptionalized issues affecting only the Okinawan periphery. In the case of the redress movement, it was rejected as an irregular war-related issue that did not resonate with ordinary Japanese. In other words, most felt that such concerns were the special problems of others, not their own. My research aims to explore the roots of a new historical and social consciousness that lies hidden in the once forgotten voices of Okinawan war survivors.
今や存在しない慰安所を沖縄人は常に想起している。で、その過去を思い出しながら軍事暴力にこうしていると。その意味でこの慰安所とは過去を想起する場であり、記憶する場であり、また抵抗の場にもなっていると考えます。
Today the comfort stations are gone, and yet older Okinawans still remember them. Those memories of the battlefield include Korean women and comfort stations that disappeared nearly 80 years ago. In those recollections, perhaps they catch some glimpse of themselves, of their own experience of war, and of their subject position in the Japanese state. And something in that self-reflection urges them to confront the past and the present simultaneously and engage proactively with the military violence that afflicts Okinawa today. In that sense, we can say that the long-gone comfort stations of Okinawa remain very much alive in the Okinawan consciousness as sites of remembrance, sites of self-reflection, and sites of resistance to ongoing military violence.
例えば今南西諸島の軍事化が進む宮古島ではこのように慰安婦のための碑が建てられています。で、大きな岩を置いたこの、証言者の前で私は偶然出会いました。彼はでここの今岩を置いた場所はかつては周辺に慰安所があって、この慰安所からこの今岩があるところまでその慰安婦たちがですね、この岩のところで休んだみたいですね。ここは大きな木があって、その軍隊の洗濯物をしていた朝鮮人慰安婦たちがその木陰で休んでいたと言われています。彼はこの岩をここにわざわざ運んできて、今は何もないけれども自分の記憶の中の朝鮮人慰安婦を記憶に留めようとしました。そしてこの地域の住民たちはアリランの歌を今も覚えています。この日は後にアリランの日というふうに名付けられた日になります。
In recent years, the Japanese government has begun to remilitarize the Ryukyu archipelago. On Miyako Island in Okinawa's far south, I met a war survivor one day who was so moved by his memories of the comfort women who once gathered there that he moved a large rock to mark the spot. At the time, there was a tree beside the boulder, and the women would sit down and rest in its shade on their way back from the local well, after washing their clothes and those of the soldiers who frequented their comfort station. Villagers felt badly about the women who had been dragooned in Korea and sent to their island as sexual solace for the troops. Local residents, even today, know how to sing the song Arirang.
またこの証言に共鳴した人たちによって後ろの候補の3つの碑を建て、女たちへという碑が建てられました。ここには約12カ国の言語で平和を祈る碑文が刻み込まれています。で それは占領地また植民地で慰安婦たちが自らの証言を語った証言するときに使った言語でこのように平和の祈りを書いています。私はこうした草の根運動のプロセスは迫り来る再軍備化に対抗する一つの象徴的な行為であり、沖縄の独自な運動の形態だと考えています。
Inspired by the testimonies of local eyewitnesses, others, including local residents, researchers, and human rights activists, expanded that monument, which became known as the Memorial to All Comfort Women. A stone triptych behind the boulder is dedicated to all the women, and its epitaph, a prayer for peace, has been inscribed in the 12 languages spoken by comfort women from former Japanese colonies and occupied territories. The memorial was completed in 2008. To me, this grassroots process of building on war remembrances to memorialize the wartime interactions of Okinawans with Korean and Taiwanese comfort women represents a potent symbolic act of defiance in the face of encroaching remilitarization, an act that is uniquely Okinawan.
私はこの抵抗の姿勢を沖縄語ではチムグルシタという言葉があるんですが、それによるものではないかと考えます。チムグルシタとは日本語では同情でかわいそうに気の毒と訳されますが、それは訳しきれない痛みに対する態度を示す言葉だと考えます。
Here I'm reminded of the word chimugurusa, an Okinawan concept that defines exact definition. In Japanese, chimugurusa is sometimes translated as sympathy or pity, but those words do not do justice to the term's subtleties. It basically suggests the stirrings of sensitivity when faced with the pain of others.
チムグルシタは今現在沖縄では辺野古の基地建設による失っていく海を思う心境として語られて抵抗の言葉として使われています。で、今現在辺野古基地建設のゲート前で行われている座り込みはすでに3000日を超えてまして、その浜のテントを抵抗するこの行為は7000日を超えました。およそ8年、それぞれ8年、19年の歳月に相当します。で、戦場の記憶、27年間の米軍の占領で、そして復帰後も続く軍事暴力で軍事化で、そういう原点となるものがこのチムグルシタであって、単なる同情というより深い意味合いを持ちます。つまり他人の痛みを自分の痛みとして受け止めて、その苦しみの原因となっている状況、それに対してどうしようもないけれども個人で立ち向かう責任でこの取り組むということを意味する語がチムグルシタです。
One hears this term at Henoko, where the central government is destroying a pristine coastal ecology to build a new U.S. Marine base over the objections of local residents and other Okinawans. In this case, Chimugurusa expresses the deep sense of violation and loss caused by the state's unrelenting defilement of the sea and the elimination of the unique life forms it supports. To date, protesters have staged daily sit-ins there for 3,000 days in a row. That's 8 years. Their tents have remained standing for 7,000 days running. That's 19 years. They are sustained in their struggle by memories of the battlefield, the 27-year military occupation, U.S. military occupation, and the post-reversion maintenance and expansion of American bases. Chimugurusa is deeper than empathy. It means accepting someone else's suffering as your own and taking personal responsibility to engage with the problems that cause that suffering. It may also be seen as a form of subtle resistance.
最後にこの2枚の写真を皆さんに紹介しながらまとめたいと思います。で、この写真は集団自決があった茶まみ、そこの収容所で米軍の病院の中の様子ですね。こうやって集団自決でこの親によって首が切られた子どもたちで、彼らを米軍は trapped children と呼んでいます。
I would like to end this presentation with 2 photographs taken by U.S. military personnel in April on April 24th, 1945. The setting is a hospital tent in a refugee camp on Zamami Island in the Kurama chain. Zamami was the site of a particularly vicious compulsory group suicide. During the suicide, Japanese parents attempted to cut the throats of their children, as shown in the photo. The U.S. Army has labeled the youngsters Jap children.
これは次です、please。で、次の写真は同じ空間にいる3人の朝鮮人慰安婦の様子です。で、女性たちはゲイシャガールズと呼ばれていました。1945年4月21日と書かれています。つまり沖縄戦が始まったばっかりの時、彼女たちまたその子供たちは痛みつけられた身体のまんま戦後を迎えようとしています。で、写真の中のこの子供たちもまた慰安婦たちもこの笑みを浮かばせていますね。しかしそれを見る私たちは一体どのようにこの中からチム苦しさを見出せられるんでしょうか。
In the second photo, we see three former comfort women standing outside their tent in the same camp. They are smiling at the camera. The three Koreans are described as geisha girls. The date, April 24th, indicates that the U.S. invasion is well underway. The children and the women are fully present, still bearing their physical and psychic wounds, but ready to enter the post-war era. All appear to smile. Looking at their faces, we must ask ourselves a question. Do we feel the stirrings of Chimugurusa?
本書で私は慰安婦問題について今まで皆さんが聞いてきた日韓関係中心とはやや異なるちょっと異質な慰安婦問題の視点を提示したと思います。日々軍事暴力にさらされている中で他人の痛みを見るチム苦しさを持っている人たちが考えるあるいは共鳴する抵抗してきた精神の中で生きる慰安婦問題ですね。で、慰安婦は確かに他者です。でも、地上戦の中に沖縄の人たちは慰安婦を見てきて、その他者の経験が今度は自分たちにも起きるかもしれない、起こりうるのであるということを経験しました。
This book portrays the comfort women in a very different light from the self-serving diplomatic quick fixes favored by the Japanese and South Korean governments. The difference is in the still silent gaze of Chimugurusa, which goes far beyond the mandatory questions of force and volition. Faced with the daily threat of military violence, Chimugurusa invokes both a reflection on the past and a spirit of defiance that refuses to accept defeat. To be sure, to Okinawans, the comfort women were others. But on the battlefield, those who saw the women realized that the plight of Koreans could also be their own, creating a potential affinity or relational tie. Memories of the comfort stations are a historical product of the Okinawan experience of war. It is my hope that in those remembrances we can find a path for overcoming nationalism, ethnocentrism, and misogyny.
リケトさんと私は一心同体ですのでで、この結論の言いたいことは今リケトさんがおっしゃったように、でこの経験から考えてみますと、やはりこの沖縄のこの記憶から発信している沖縄戦場と慰安所の記憶は、このナショナリズムだとか、この自国のこの民族主義に基づく人種主義とか、女性の嫌悪を超える一つの希望を提示するものであると考えます。で、それはある意味で現在進行中の戦場と戦場の暴力にこの他人事のように見ている今現在の私たちにもしかしたらこのように質問してるんじゃないかと思います。で、あなたたちは一体どのような立場、どのような姿勢で何を見ているのかという問いとして沖縄の戦場の記憶の中の慰安所があると思います。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
I'm sorry, I don't think I can translate everything you said at the
Yeah,
end.
it's
But it's
okay.
true. We had very long and intense discussions over which parts of this manuscript to keep and which parts to throw away. And this afternoon, we decided to throw away quite a bit of material, including at least two very important passages that I threw away, but that Yunshin-san went ahead and explained. So I'm feeling a little bit flustered.
okay.
But anyway, I think you get the general gist of the talk and what we're talking about. It's not. Well, it's okay. Let's leave it at that,
Yeah.
because I'm sure you have questions you want to ask, and we don't have a lot of time. So
Thank you very much, Yunshin Hong, and thank you very much, Robert Ricketts, for your translation. We now come to the Q&A. First, I wanted to tell you the book is available there for 13,000 yen, which is 50% off. So only tonight you get it for 50% off. Brill is a famous science publisher, and they have this kind of prices. So 13,000, 50% off. As always, this is not a press conference, so you are very welcome to express an opinion or say more than a short questions, but please no speeches. Who is first? Fred, you come to the microphone, please, and introduce yourself.
My name is Fred Varco, a freelance reporter. Two initial questions. There was a report by the US military in Burma at the end of the war that described comfort women as common Japanese prostitutes. I noticed you had, right at the end, you had some stuff from the American military there. So I wonder if there was any report by the American military about the comfort women in Okinawa, and what did it say? Did it say something similar to the report in Burma?
okay, can we do that first?
Yeah.
Okay.ごめんなさい、日本語ですね。第二次世界大戦の終わる頃で、ビルマで米軍が慰安婦の調査をやったんですよね。それでその結果はいろいろありましたけれども、中には慰安婦たちは幼い子供みたい、無責任でなんか半分遊んでるっていうそういうよく言われることなんですけれども、それで沖縄の場合はなんかそのような報告、米軍の研究とか報告とか慰安婦についてのどういう人たちだったのかとか、どういう状況でに置かれていたのかとか存在しましたか？しますか？
米軍がどのように慰安婦を
いやそういう報告を作ったのかどうか。
で、沖縄では大体この本にも書いてありますけれども、大体ですね、上陸した後でこの米軍が認識して慰安婦を最初は傾斜ゴルジュと言ったけれども、だんだんコンポートマントで認識して、で相関名簿を作っていますね。で、147名ぐらいの相関名簿が1945年の10月の段階にあります。で、そしてスタンフォード大学のフバー研究所にはなんかこの女性たちについてのレポートも入っているんですね。でアメリカ軍の場合は女性たちが厳しい待遇を受けていたということを承知の上で、その相関名簿でまた簡単な報告は書いています。
多分ビルマの報告のほどの詳しいものではないですね。で、そのビルマのものはその心理作戦部隊が作ったで、これじゃなくてただ単に
状況報告、
戦場で出会って、それで囲んでですね、それでキャンプに案内した程度ですけれども、でただどういう人たちなのかわからないけどね、芸者っていう。Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, you've got me confused now. I'm speaking English, right? The U.S. Military government teams came into contact with the comfort women as they were really sort of wrapping up the battle, and they ran into them and they took them into and put them in refugee camps. And they did say that they had encountered these people and they seemed lost and that they were geisha girls or something else. And they made a roster at the end of 1945, October 1945, a general roster.
Report of military activity.
Oh, the report. Okay, yeah, right. That's right. This is the report of military activities. This is your average activity report that was filed for October, and they described these encounters with the comfort women, but they made a general roster of about 147, and it was on that basis that they were repatriated to Korea. Stanford University apparently wrote a report about the comfort women at the end of the war. Stanford University, yeah, at the Hoover Institute made a study of them, but we don't have access to that, so we can't say. But it was nothing like the Burmese study, which was actually the Burmese study was actually very complex, and it wasn't just that the girls were childish and had a good time. It was how they got there and how they were tricked into following an agent, a Korean or Japanese agent. It was a husband and wife team that recruited them, and it explains, yeah. So yeah. So and actually the report is a mixture. It's quite a very complete report. So you can't just cite one section of it and say this. Yeah.
I don't. I have read the full report, but the irony is that the Uyoku in Japan use the American phrases as evidence that they were prostitutes, whereas in fact later on in the report, which is partly about interrogations, the Japanese actually admit to setting up comfort stations in Burma. So
yes, no, thank you. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
そして心理作戦についての研究は今韓国でもものすごい盛んでいて、このアメリカの心理作戦いろんな状況、いろんなもので、そのフィルムだけじゃなくてあるので、それは今 GHQ の文章で今研究が盛んに行われています。
In Korea, this is also a subject of acute interest, and there's a lot of discussion on the psychological operation units and their report, and it wasn't limited just to Burma. Apparently, they did studies on comfort women in other areas as well. So it's quite an active area of research now. But as you say, very correctly, the net uyo, or the people who want to deny the existence of the comfort women, cherry pick the odds, because it's a very honest report. And these were a lot of these women were recruited as minors. They weren't even. There was a legal age in international law for the dividing line between a woman and a girl, a teenager, is very clear. I think 19歳でした。だと思うんですよね。But a lot of the comfort women were taken at the age of 16 or 15 or 14. Some of the comfort women had never had a period. So, and there's reasons for that. This was done very explicitly. They had explicit reasons for doing that. So it's quite complicated anyway. Yeah.
We go to the next question. Yes, please. You come to the microphone, please. And you introduce yourself, please.
たけし川崎フリーランスに相当。Dr. Hom, I was told that you were teaching at various universities here in Japan. What is the students' reaction when they heard about this kind of history. Thank you.
実際まあ大学生たちはやはりこのまず沖縄戦について非常に関心ちょっと新しいなんか意見を聞いたという反応と、まず教育者として教えるときはやはりグローバルなものを最初教えて、でまた沖縄の周辺的なものも一緒に教えるようにしていますけれども、非常に大学生たちは今偏見で日韓関係だから慰安婦問題あんまり興味がないと思われるかもしれませんけれども、実際私の講義大体100人以上の学生たちが来ているんですね。でそしてアンケート調査をしてみると、慰安婦問題知りたいという学生非常に多いです。で実際今年もある大学では3日間集中的にこの本について講義してくれというので、3日間15回に分けてこの全てのチャプターを教えたことがありますね。だからこの慰安婦の問題というふうにアプローチせずにこの人権、平和、ジェンダーという視点から対話していくと、実は非常に日本の若い世代は興味が高いということをこの場ではっきり申し上げておきたいと思います。
It's true that young people appear not to be interested in.
No, they are.
I know. But you get the impression, you could get the impression that many of them are not interested in hearing about this because the problem has been politicized so much. And they come in from that, from hearing only one side of the story, in fact, a very negative side of the story. And, but in fact, in Dr. Hong's class, she has a class of 100 students in one course, and she did a survey, asked them, what they expected from the course and what they want, and if they were interested in different things. And a very surprisingly large number of them said, yes, they want to know more about this. And this is not just limited to the comfort women issue. Gender, human rights, and related questions that they're not supposed to be interested in from the point of view of, if you look at the government's position on the comfort women issue, even now, that's not particularly a desirable trait. And that has to do with education policy, and it gets the discussion becomes very, very complicated. But in fact, there is a lot of interest. They want to know, and so I don't, Mr. Takahashi, is that okay? Oh, is that okay? Was your question answered? Well, no, go ahead. You can continue.
The next question, let's go to the next question, please. Anybody? We are almost at the end, so if anybody a burning question? Did you wanna? Yeah. Yes, please. You want? Yes, please.
Thank you, Yunshin-san, so much. This is such a thick book with so much information. So I've read it once, but when I hear you talk about it point to point, then it helped me understand the essence of the book more. My question, if you don't mind, could you share some of the experiences of, you've done 14 years of field work in Okinawa?
Yeah.
That's a long time. So you interacted with so many local Okinawan people. And what I guess is that it's not a comfortable question, right? For many Okinawan people who have that memory of. And of course, given the fact that there were Okinawan women who were taken as comfort women as well. So would you share some of your experiences of drawing, stories from those Okinawan people? What was difficult or what was impressive or things like that, if you don't mind? Thank you.
Thank you, Satoko.
If you understood the
Yeah,
questions,
okay,
then we
okay.
don't need translation.
Yeah,
of the
okay.
questions.
So, まず、韓国人生まれで、その韓国人の育てですけれども、もともと慰安婦研究しに沖縄を訪ねたことはありません。もともとは人間のための安全保障の理論研究ですね。ところで、やはり皆さんが今日聞いて、お分かりになったように、非常に日本語が、独特な日本語を使いますよね。やっぱりこの、朝鮮語の訛りのある日本語ですので、その私のイントネーションで、ブロックンジャパニーズが、やはり、このどこか、このリコールされたんですよね。私の言葉で。それで私が尋ねるあるところで、あなたみたいな朝鮮人慰安婦がいたということで、自然に証言がたくさん聞くようになります。で、そういうことで、やはりだんだんなぜこのように記憶しているのかということを焦点当てて、書くようになりましたし、この証言、非常に全てが、私には印象深かったんですが、で、今日若干紹介した、宮古島のものは、今までの研究ではほとんど明らかになってないものを、私がこの調査する中で、まるで本当に一つの映画のように、ドラマのように、自然と岩の前で証言者に会って、この岩は何ですかと。で、これは慰安婦が座ってたところだよというところから、すべてこう、どんどんこの島の状況わかるようになったので、忘れられないとしたら、やっぱり、すべてではあるんですが、宮古島のこのプロセスですね。はい。で、答えになったかもしれない。はい。
So, her most impressive memory is her experience in Miyakojima when she was wandering around one day and she happened to meet this person, and one thing led to another, and then she saw the stone, and well, what's this, and what's the meaning of that, and why were you mean Korean comfort women came here? Why? And one thing led to another, and it took her right into the life of the people of Miyakojima, because these things are not written about and probably not talked about a lot to outsiders. It was something very personal and intimate and interior that it's become part of the local ethos or mentality or their historical experience is a fancy word, but for and it's a part of their mentality and part of their life. It's not a distant memory. It's not something that happened in the past. It's not something that doesn't have anything to do with them because they're intimately connected with it, and they accept that. And in fact, they go a step further, and they use this to memorialize the women, their suffering, and to pray for peace and reconciliation with themselves, because they, as Okinawa was a part of the Japanese Empire, and there's that aspect of their. There was that aspect, and that's, you see that in the book. People looking at Okinawa as it's an exceptionalized. It's been exceptionalized. It's been excluded from the mainstream, and everything else that goes with a sort of, if you want to, you can use the term, if you want to use the term semi-colonial or internal colony, all these fancy words, but they mean basically the same thing. And
I would like to squeeze in one last short questions with a short answer, please. John Mitchell. We are late, I get signals.
So my name is John Mitchell. I'm a correspondent for Okinawa Times. I've read about 3/4 of your book. We just got it last week, and it's
you.
absolutely incredible. The way that you bring together testimony, the way that you interview people, the way that you recorded, all these different aspects of this issue. And I
Thank you
just
so
have to
much.
ask, what's next? What are you working on at the moment? How can you, beat
Top
this
up,
incredible
top up.
project?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for it. で、次の研究は、この沖縄戦のこの、記憶をもっとこの可能性を極めていきたいということを考えてまして、やっぱりこの米軍この沖縄戦後から朝鮮戦争に至るまでの過程をもうちょっとこの、ジェンダー視点でこう捉えていきたいなと思います。だから女性のジェンダー視点、また沖縄戦後も続くさまざまな困難ということを私はやっぱり外部の視点を持ってますので、だから外部の青さのこの周辺的なこの自分が持っているこう立場から、また日本の研究者で沖縄の研究者ではない視点でちょっと普遍的に捉えられるのを見つけていきたいなと思いますが、よろしくお願いします。
She's become very interested as an extension of her work on the Okinawan War and memory. She's become very interested in what happened in the years from the end of the war, 1945, to the start of the Korean War, 1950. And there's a period of confusion, and there were all kinds of problems. And she wants to get into that and find out more about what was going on. And but from the point of view of an outsider, because she's not Japanese and she's not Okinawan, she's Korean, and this gives her a slightly
gender perspective.
and a gender perspective. That's right.
Thank you very much. Now, before you give our speakers a big hand, I have 3 points. The book is available for 50% discount only tonight.
Thank you.
It's published by Brill. Second, our next book break is not exactly a book break. It's a translators forum with three translators of literature that will discuss their trade. It's on October 25th. And as a token of our appreciation, you both get a 1-year free membership.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now, please, a big hand for our speakers.
Okay.